International Open Access Week, a global event now entering its 14th year, and is an opportunity for open access advocates to engage their communities to teach them about the potential benefits of open access. This year's International Open Access Week theme, it matters how we open knowledge, building structural equity, highlights the individual and collective action required in our approach, decisions, actions, and investments in knowledge sharing to ensure that equity is foundational. This is the first time we have partnered with California State University Northridge Library, and I hope many of you already enjoyed this CSUN's Open Access Week event yesterday. I would like to, on behalf of the Open Access Group at Cal State L.A. University Library, I would like to welcome everyone to today's Way at LA mini conference. We have a great lineup of speakers from Cal State L.A, CSU East Bay, and UCSD. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you with the members of the University Library's Open Access Group for organizing this mini conference in this uncertain time. Again, I'm Jayati, coordinator of the Open Access Group. We have Tiffany Ford Baxter, our science librarian.
Morning, everyone. Oh, sorry.
We have Kimberly Franklin, our education librarian.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here.
And we have Sarah Baker, our research services librarian in this group.
Hi, everyone.
Also, I would like to express my sincere gratefulness to Kelsey Brown, communication strategist and event coordinator. Without Kelsey's help, it would have been really hard to organize this event. Thank you, Kelsey. Lastly, I would like to express my thankfulness to our Dean, Carlos Rodriguez, for his support and leadership. At the end of the session, you will have opportunity to fill up a short survey. Thank you all again for attending today's mini conference. Soon I'm going to introduce our first speaker. But before that, I would like to read the land acknowledgement statement that was passed by Academic Senate. Land acknowledgement statement. With great respect, Cal State L.A. acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tovangar, the Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Cal State L.A. is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives' relations past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State L.A. more accountable to the needs of American Indian peoples. Thank you all. Now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. With great pleasure, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dean of the California State University Libraries, Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos Rodriguez is the Dean of the University Library at Cal State L.A., a position he has held since May 2016. He has over 35 years experience working in higher education and has held academic library positions at Grand Valley State University, Sacramento State, and UC Riverside. For the past 5 years, he has been actively engaged in transforming the university library into the physical and digital center of intellectual exploration, knowledge creation, scholarly and creative engagement that will prepare students to be lifelong learners and information literate global citizens in an increasingly digital environment. Without further ado, let's welcome our Dean, Carlos Rodriguez.
Thank you, Giadi, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second. Again, welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before I start, I would like to sort of echo Giadi's thanks to the planning committee, to the organizers, and particularly you, Giadi, for coordinating this event. I believe this is the 4th or 5th year we've done it at Cal State L.A. This is also the first time we've had speakers outside of Cal State L.A., so I am hopeful and I am sure this is something that will continue, where there's a lot of interest across the CSUs to collaborate more and to create opportunities where we can all share the work that we're doing. So appreciative for our colleagues from CSU East Bay who are joining us, and also UC San Diego. So welcome to them as well. Giadi mentioned that this is International Open Access Week. This is actually its 14th year. Open access, the idea of the open access has been around for quite a long time, at least 20 years. But the International Open Access Week, like I mentioned, is in its 14th year. This is also the 4th consecutive year that the event has focused on some aspect of diversity and inclusion. Even in open spaces for sharing knowledge, structural racism, discrimination, and exclusion exist that must be addressed. I like to quote Nick Shockey, who's the Director of Programs and Engagement for SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. He shared last year that openness can be a powerful tool for building more equitable systems of sharing knowledge. Rebuilding research and scholarship to be open by default presents a unique opportunity to construct a foundation that is fundamentally more equitable. Yet today, structural racism, discrimination, and exclusion are present and persistent in places where openness is a core value. As a global community, it is important to understand that these systems and spaces of the present are often built upon legacies of historic injustice, and that addressing these inequities is a necessity. We need to examine who these spaces and systems are designed for, who is missing, who is excluded by the business models we use, and whose interests are prioritized. As we work together to rebuild these structures, we need to commit to moving from conversations to concrete commitments and to hold one another accountable for making real progress. This year's Open Access Week theme also aligns with UNESCO's recent recommendation on Open Science Report, which is the first framework for establishing global standards for open access. For research to be truly open, the report states that it should embrace a diversity of knowledge, practices, workflows, languages, research outputs, and research topics that support the needs and epistemic pluralism of the scientific community as a whole, diverse research communities and scholars, as well as the wider public and knowledge holders. Giadi mentioned the theme for this year's conference, It Matters, How We Open Knowledge, Building Structural Equity. I mentioned that open access has been around for a while, and this is a definition provided by SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, which is the free, immediate online availability of research articles, coupled with the rights to use these articles fully in the digital environment. So I want to talk today about what has really led to the motivation to really not just pursue open access, but really strongly advocate for open access. And libraries and authors have been really leading this effort for many years. Really what started this really push was obviously the internet, and online access has really fundamentally changed the way we create, share, and engage with knowledge. Really, in many ways, that the internet has democratized knowledge and has made it accessible by not only the privileged few, but a much larger global audience. Our hope 20, 25 years ago, when really the web and the internet really started to impact how people accessed information, was that costs would be reduced to scholarly publications and access would be increased. Unfortunately, that has not happened. I'm going to talk a little bit about really what's happened in the last 25 years as far as the diminishing of access and also the increased costs that has really provided barriers to access to our scholarly research. But the motivation for open access really is based on sort of the traditional scholarly communication mechanism, which is really provided through scholarly journal articles and through conference papers. Scholarly research has not really been freely accessible under traditional journal publishing models. And I'm going to mention some emerging publishing models that really is trying to address this. Of course, access, given the high cost, is inequitable right now, given that many people aren't able to afford the increasing cost of journals, and not only the library's budgets are being flat or being reduced, but the cost of journals has been going up. And I'll show you a little bit about sort of the cost of journals over the last 15, 20 years. The other thing that really motivated the discussion from open access is that research really is not disseminated as widely as it could be. So again, given these barriers to access, given often by price or by permission, by copyright, that it's not available as it could be. And lastly, really authors, typically, and particularly faculty at the universities who are one of the major authors for scholarly journals, often these publishing agreements that our authors sign typically transfer the copyright to the publisher. So these two areas, price and access, because of permission, really are the two fundamental reasons why open access is becoming increasingly important. So the first one I mentioned was regarding price. Price is an extremely strong barrier to access to scholarly record. As I mentioned, there's been a huge increase in rising journal subscriptions over the last 25 years. And often libraries have flat budgets, so it's very difficult to us to maintain that. This increase in price also decreases the ability for people to access, particularly those in developing countries, possibly who don't have the budgets to provide the access to these increasingly expensive resources. The other area is removing the permission barrier. And again, I mentioned that typically authors, when they sign publishing agreements, they transfer their copyright to the publisher. So the goal of open access also is for authors to retain their copyright, and these new publishing agreements that libraries are working with publishers on, is that's sort of one fundamental aspect of these new agreements, is that the author is able to retain their copyright. And of course, these permission barriers really allow scholars to reuse and reuse literature for scholarly purposes. So really these two areas here, removing price barriers and removing permission barriers, are really the motivation and the reason why open access is becoming increasingly important. Here is some costs for the last 5 years. The Library Journal publishes an annual periodical price survey. So as you can see here, the average title cost, and this is through journals in the Academic Search Premier article database. Over the last 5 years, there's been an increase on average between 5 and 6% per year, which really equates to an over 30% increase over the last 5 years, whereas the rate of inflation during that same time period has been less than 10%. So as you can see here, the cost of journals has been going way up beyond inflation rate, and typically during these years, libraries' budgets have been flat. So that's been a challenge for us. The other impact is sort of the consolidation of publishers. So this is not current, but it does show that the 5 major publishers in the social sciences and humanities are really increasingly responsible for the majority of the papers that are being published. So this oligopoly that exists today, not just in the social sciences and the humanities, but really this is even more of an issue in the sciences, natural medical sciences, where you see particularly around chemistry, where you see the major publishers accounting for, in chemistry, for example, 75% of all publications are published by these 5 major publishers. So what that's causing is really, like I mentioned, an increase in journal titles. And here's sort of based on that same periodical price survey from last year, where you'll see on average, there's been annual increases between 4 and almost 10% per year, depending on the discipline. The sciences typically have higher journal title costs, up to $6,000 for chemistry journals. But even the social sciences and humanities, they're ranging in several hundreds of dollars per year, and also these annual increases of 5 to 10%. So this is definitely has been unsustainable, and this is really driving even more urgency for us to have these discussions with the publishers. So I mentioned that the publishers and the libraries who really are acting on behalf of the universities in negotiation really have been having these conversations with publishers over the last decade or so. And the goal here is to change the publishing model, the publishing landscape model. So typically libraries pay for access to journal content. And typically these are through large subscriptions. We use often the term big deals, which is similar to the metaphor of cable TV bundling, where publishers will, for one cost, one price, give us access to a lot of journal titles. So the cost per journal title is relatively low. However, often these journal titles, many of them, they're not heavily used. So we're actually paying for journals that we really don't need, similar to, all of you probably have had cable subscriptions where you really are paying for 100 cable channels, but you're really only accessing or viewing 10 or 15 of them, similar with the big deal subscriptions that publishers have been providing for years. The goal of this new model is to really shift the model where we're not paying to access these articles, but we're really paying to publish. So there's 2 types of approaches that we've been using. One is read and publish and read agreements, and they're very similar. The read and publish agreement, basically the publisher receives payment for reading and a payment for OA publishing bundled into a single contract. And typically this redirects funds that were previously spent on subscription-based reading to a publishing component. And the goal here is to have a cost-neutral agreement. And the main focus of a read and publish agreement really is on the read portion. Conversely, a publish and read agreement, where the publisher receives payment for both OA publishing and reading, is included at no additional cost. And the goal here is also cost neutral, but perhaps even a decrease in annual cost to the journal subscriptions. This approach has really led to universities being successful in negotiating these new type of agreements, which we're referring to as transformative agreements. And the CSUs a few years ago were successful in negotiating a transformative agreement with Elsevier. So we're in the middle of negotiating for a renewal, and we hope that we're able to continue with that same approach. A transformative agreement really is an agreement where the contracts negotiated between institutions, for example, libraries and publishers, really transform the business model, where we're moving on one that's based on subscription model to one where publishers are remunerated a fair price for their open access publishing services. So this is something that libraries have been actively pursuing, and the UCs really have been a leader in this area where they've been strongly advocating for the shift to these type of transformative agreements. Basically, a principle of a transformative agreement. I mentioned the costs typically are shifting from paying for a subscription to really paying for publishing. The other component of a transformative agreement is that the copyright be retained by the author and not transferred to the publisher. So this is by default. Any agreements that we make as part of a transformative agreement, the author retains the copyright. There's just nothing that the author needs to do. The other thing with these agreements that libraries have been signing with publishers is typically we're often asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So the goal of a transformative agreement is that the terms of agreement are made public, they're transparent, everyone can see what we're paying. And again, the goal here of a transformative agreement is to really seek a pathway from payment to read to more payment to publish, with the hopeful goal of really eliminating subscription-based reading licenses. So what are the benefits of open access to either the society or researchers and authors and scholars? This diagram sort of shows sort of a high level benefits for both authors and for society as a whole. For society, obviously, much of our research is funded through taxpayer dollars, and often that research through grants that are faculty often receive. And the expectation is that the results of the research is published and made available to the public, to the taxpayers who are actually funding this research. And by putting these publications to or making them inaccessible through expensive journals, that really limits the ability for the public to access the research that they're funding. Also, the practitioners can actually apply the research because it's increased access. People can access the research because now it's not behind a paywall. But really, I want to focus on the benefits for authors, which is something that libraries have been trying to increase awareness among our faculty, and particularly who are really need to be involved in this discussion. So some of the benefits for authors who are publishing in open access journals is that studies have shown that open access articles typically are viewed and cited more than articles that are behind a paywall. The other thing is, what I mentioned earlier, is that authors are able to control their intellectual property, so they can determine how to reuse that. They don't need to seek permission from the publisher if they want to, for example, share their work with students in their class. Often faculty are unaware that given the limitations or the agreement that they sign, it prevents them from really fully sharing publications that they've authored. We feel that there's a huge greater impact in and for our authors because it increases their visibility of their research, and really not only by other scholars, but by policymakers, practitioners, and the general public, like I mentioned before. I mentioned earlier that often because of the high cost of journals, it limits the ability for the global community to really access this scholarship, particularly those in developing countries. And also, there's been studies shown that this also increases collaboration among researchers by really providing greater visibility to their research. Like I mentioned, the idea of open access and really this movement has been building quite a bit of momentum over the last 10, 15 years. Currently, right now, in the directory of open access journals, there are about 17,000, over 17,000 open access journals. There are also over 5,700 institutional repositories as listed in the directory of open access repositories. Cal State L.A. is part of the CSU institutional repository, which is called ScholarWorks. So we're one of the 5,700 repositories worldwide, and that number is increasing quite a bit every year. The other thing that I mentioned is that increasingly, you'll hear a little bit about some of these OA policies that are being implemented in the CSU, particularly the one that was just recently approved at East Bay, is that our funding agencies are really now mandating open access. They're requiring that. And obviously there's policies that are being implemented at universities. So this is something that's really increasing. Our faculty are becoming more aware of this, and universities are also becoming more aware of this and really actively promoting open access on their campuses. And like I mentioned, publishers really are now engaging with librarians and authors a lot more, and willing to have this discussion with librarians who initially were reluctant to do that. But there's been a movement where many of the major publishers are providing open access journal options for authors. They're participating and negotiating in these transformative agreements. So there's hope that this work will continue. Here at Cal State L.A., here's some of the things that we're doing here to support increased awareness about open access. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, the Academic Senate of the CSU passed a resolution in support of faculty publication rights with the Green Open Access Policy. And like I mentioned, East Bay recently passed also a Green Open Access Policy that you hear about in a second. Also here at Cal State, 3 years ago, we established an open access author fund. Jay Audi really is coordinating that, but the idea here is that many of the publishers provide open access option. Often they require authors to pay an article processing charge, an APC. Through the open access author fund, the library can cover some or all of that APC. The other thing that we're doing at Cal State L.A. is that we are, in addition to the conference that we do every year during International Open Access Week, we are creating additional workshops and webinars on open access, open education, resources, open scholarship, open data, open science. And this is through the Institute of Research and Information Studies, IRIS. These workshops and webinars are available really to anyone in the Cal State community, faculty and students. So you can definitely just go there and take a look at the workshops that we have. We've also last year implemented a tool to help faculty not only identify and discover and become aware of open education resources, but easily include them in their courses through a Canvas reading list tool. So that's a new tool that was implemented last year. I mentioned ScholarWorks, the CSU-wide institutional repository, and the transformative agreement that we signed with Elsevier last year. And we're hopeful that we'll continue to sign these transformative agreements with other publishers. And really, I would encourage you, if you're new to open access or would like to learn more about open access, definitely reach out to your librarians who are increasingly becoming more familiar with open access. But SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, has sort of a wealth of resources there that provide some additional information about open access. So I think that is my time. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the speakers this morning.
Thank you, Carlos.
You're welcome, Kimberly.
Are there any questions coming in through the Q&A? Okay, thank you, Tiffany. So once again, thank you to Dean Carlos Rodriguez for that great presentation about the all of the facets of open access and scholarly publishing and communication. Very much appreciated.